Hello, and welcome back to the Thomistic Institute podcast for off-campus conversations. I don't know why. I find the internet to be a silly place and podcasts to be sillier still, so it's great that we get to follow up with the Thomistic Institute speakers and talk about their lectures, chase down some insights. But yeah, conversing over the internet, I never quite get used to it, but that's besides the point. So for this installment of Off-Campus Conversations, I'm very delighted to be joined by Professor Jane Peters. Thanks for joining.
Hi, thank you. Happy to be here.
Cheers. All right, that makes two of us. So you may be known to some Thomistic Institute podcast listeners because you have given lectures for the Thomistic Institute. You have done other things with your life, like you have a family, which is better than doing anything for the Thomistic Institute. Actually, we could, evaluate the hierarchy of goods later. But for those who don't know you, would you say a word of introduction?
Sure. My name's Jane. I teach at the College of Mount St. Vincent, which is a school on the Hudson River in New York City, in the Bronx. And I did my PhD on Aquinas' reception of Greek sources for the Catena Aurea, which is his 4-volume commentary on Scripture. And then I live in Connecticut, and I have 2 boys. They are 4 and 2. So that's what I do with all my time. Yeah.
That's awesome. My sister Rebecca has 4 children who are 7, 5, 3, and 1. And sometimes when I talk to her, Peter, who is 3, wants to get her attention. And typically the way that he does so is by saying this: Mom, 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 Mom.
Yeah.
He's a tremendous human being. I have such deep affection for him, but small boys, they're wild. They're wild.
Yeah. Yeah. They need a lot of love, and they're wild. A lot of the hugs I get are just basically tackles, headbutts.
Yep.
Yeah.
My sister was recounting to me the other day that the 2 older kids were at school and then the youngest was asleep. And so Peter was like, Mom, can we snuggle? And she was like, yes, we can snuggle. And so they went about, snuggling, but on a narrow couch. And so there was some difficulty finding a spot in which everyone fit. By everyone, I mean both of them. And so Peter suggested, Mom, can you just staple me to you?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I'm trying to incorporate that in my prayer life. Like, Lord, can you just staple me to you? We'll see what comes of it. Okay, but that is not the theme of this conversation. The theme of this conversation, it's actually pursuant to a lecture that you gave at Brown on AI and speech. So human speech, human concept, human expression, more broadly speaking. So maybe as a way to start, could you lead us into the conversation? Because you spent some time describing how AI works, and people will listen to the lecture so as to gain details on that. But maybe, insofar as you can, draw the main distinction between how AI works and then how human speech works and how you found that, to be different.
Sure. So this became a question for me and an area of interest for me just because my students were using AI. And it was really annoying because it slows grading down a ton when you have something that you can tell isn't really the student's own work and they've consulted AI for it. And I started to kind of think, how can I explain to them that I actually want to hear from them and not ChatGPT or whatever? And I thought, well, maybe Aquinas has something to say about that. So I looked at how ChatGPT works. So it's a large language model chatbot. It's been around for a while, but just gained a lot of popularity in the last couple of years. And it's GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So it's a generative kind of artificial intelligence. So it uses models or algorithms to produce new output. And it's trained on all this information. So 570 gigabytes of data. It's basically read the whole internet, and a lot of digitized books as well. And it's digested all that. And then it's been, programmed to produce output based on that information. And so it's really sophisticated. It's passed the Turing test, which is a test developed by a guy named Alan Turing like if artificial intelligence can mimic human language well enough, it passed this test. So it's very sophisticated, very effective. I was blown away by some of the things it can do when I was researching it. Like, you can give it a text message that you don't understand with a typo in it, and it'll come back to you and say, "Oh, I think your friend meant to write this word, and what he probably means is this." So it's creepily human, right? In the way it speaks, produces text. Yeah. So then I said, okay, is it really speaking? So then that's when I looked at what Aquinas said on human speech, and he doesn't have a full-blown theory of this, of semiotics, but a couple scholars have worked on this, and so I looked at their work. Fordham guy named Klima, I think. Let me check real quick.
Yeah, Julia Klima.
Yeah. Who's given talks for the TI. And then I looked at the Johannine prologue, where we talk about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Thought, what's Aquinas saying about words there? And I found out that, oh gosh, they're quite a bit different. The words produced by ChatGPT and the words produced by humans. So that was what the talk was about.
Yeah, I think so. In listening to it, one of the kind of insights by which I was struck was like the kind of human setting of conceptuality and speech formation and then speech expression. Like it's not just, so humans aren't optimizing or maximizing robots. Our lives are more complicated than that, not just in the sense of sloppier and inefficient, but in the sense of organic or organismic. And yeah, you just like highlighted some things or some ways in which speech is for the facilitation of communion or speech is for encounter, just kind of by way of passing or by way of light touch. And yeah, I guess like the thoughts that arise in my mind are, well, this is coming for us, not in the menacing or threatening type sense of a post-apocalyptic kind of futuristic, science fiction-y, how many more adjectives can I add-y, terror. But in the sense like, okay, this is a technology, this is an instrument. If it is to be used, it's to be used well, and seemingly it has to be incorporated into human culture, right, or into a genuinely human practice. So like, yeah, I suppose in your research, maybe like what could you say about the contemplative setting of these new technologies, their use? Yeah, like what might be some paths forward or paths through on the basis of some of the research that you did?
So kind of like virtuous use of this technology, or use of this technology while maintaining sort of human dignity. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess I guess I'm like, I don't want to go insane. And I think, like many 21st century people, I realize the fragility of my kind of tortured emotions and psyche before the like glut of information and its potential use. And I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
I don't want to be I do want to be a Luddite, but I don't want to admit publicly to being a Luddite. So then, like, how do I retain hold on my humanity, given all of the information that could potentially pass through it and all of the ways in which we could use these new technologies to optimize and maximize? Like, I don't know. I don't want to tacitly buy into a system wherein my humanity is laid waste as a result. Like, I don't know if I'm signing up for that.
Yeah. No, I was thinking this a little bit as I was researching. People are kind of doomsdayish about the arrival of AI. Like robots are going to take over, and it's going to be so crazy, and they'll be like flamethrowers and all this stuff. But it's so much more boring than that. Really, what it comes down to is a human being being like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to have a robot do it for me, and just yielding the will to artificial intelligence and having it produce the things and doing all the work. Um, and I think that is a sacrifice of a really important element of humanity. I did get some good pushback in the Q&A from a medical doctor, who said, "Look, I use AI to diagnose, and I don't always have the time to sit and ruminate over these symptoms." And so you can see in some ways how it can be really helpful, how it can speed things up, make things more effective. But I don't know, what I've kind of come to is we have to hold on to um, the kind of, we have to hold on to the use of our intellect and will, the exercise of our intellect and will, despite the fact that they may at times just seem so crappy. And I think that's the temptation for my students and for me, is, gosh, ChatGPT could say this so much better. And if I just asked it, it would give it to me. And then maybe I could fix a few words and boom, I would be done. But that's not really the exercise of your intellect and will. I mean, that's, the formation of a concept in the intellect is the intellect in act. And that takes a lot of work. And, as Aquinas said in the prologue, the Johannine prologue, only the word of God does this perfectly. For human beings, it requires a bunch of words, and we kind of go one way and say one thing, and then we go another way and say another thing. We talk with our hands. The process of forming a concept is kind of fraught. It's difficult. It's a little embarrassing, when we say something wrong. So it's, I guess part of it is humility, right? Part of it is realizing that, God has made us to be rational creatures that learn through cogitation, like through thinking, and that we don't get it perfectly the first time, and that we're not supposed to. So I think that's part of it. And just kind of like forging ahead in spite of that.
Okay, so I want to follow up with a couple of things, just kind of simple things like temporality, like discursion, like imperfection, because I think that, something super important for the 21st century is to realize what are the types of problems that we can solve or ameliorate, and what are the types of problems that we need to like endure or suffer. Again, not in this dread nihilistic sense, like life is visited upon you. No, like life is for you insofar as it comes forth from a provident God. But still, like difficulty is part of the story of your maturation and perfection. So maybe, okay, so thinking about like speed, temporality. You notice that with certain technologies, speed actually places serious demands, and the question is whether those demands are in fact good on your human nature. So, like the speed at which we can travel now, you arrive at a destination 300. I don't know, say a bigger word, Gregory. 3,000 miles away. It takes you 5 hours in the airplane, but then you're like a little bit bewonked because of whatever we call that, your circadian rhythm. So like you did a thing real quickly, but it takes your body time to catch up. Or like email correspondence. We used to have to send things by less immediate means, and now we have more immediate means. So there's an expectation of more immediate contact. And if somebody doesn't get back to your email within, if like you're at a big four firm within an hour, or if you're the rest of us within a day, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe they hate me. Maybe they're not going to come to my birthday party, and maybe I have no friends and whatever. Like I there's nothing in store for me except emptiness and pain. So, it's like good to have the speed, but also there's a kind of human fallout with the speed. I guess, maybe in your academic context, your life more broadly, or in the research that you've done, what are ways in which we can incorporate this new like speed of deliberation or the speed of conceptualization, so as again to retain a hold on our humanity without it, like suffering as a result, or just kind of like leaving it aside as a result?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. Here's how I would answer that. And I don't know if it's exactly what you're asking, but what I'm thinking about is specifically my students and the classroom, and how they feel pressured to understand things perfectly and say things perfectly right away. And this is especially hard in something like an intro to religious studies class or an intro to theology class, where a lot of them are really unfamiliar with this kind of conversation. And so there's a fear of just kind of not getting it right. This kind of pressure: get it right the first time, right? Or you're hopeless. Or this kind of assumption that of course you're going to say this perfectly, and if not, it must mean you're stupid. It's not that you're working through the concept and how to say it and how to sort of I don't know, like how to internally own the information that you're working with. It's just that you're dumb. And technology, I think, puts pressure on us to have a little bit of what's called a fixed mindset, like kind of a black and white, like I either can do this or I can't. I feel like my answer to this kind of sucks though, Father Gregory. I don't know.
No, it doesn't. And not just by way of cheerleading or encouragement, but in the sense that like, okay, I think this is super important. So thinking thought takes time. Thinking thought often goes by way of imperfection. And that's not just in the practical order because we're dealing with contingents and we're dealing with material things. It's also in the speculative order insofar as we, as human beings, are limited, and that the exercise of our intelligence often goes by way of corporeal organs, not in that it's, situated them so as to be wholly encompassed by them, but in the sense that, like if you haven't slept well, you're going to be foggy, or if there's a serious problem, then it's going to be obstructed or hindered. But I think that this idea of like thought taking time or thought passing off and by way of imperfection is super important. I'm thinking about this too, because like, okay, we're recording a podcast, and the podcast listener is probably listening to this at somewhere between 1.5 and 2.0 speed, because we just get in the habit of consuming content at a kind of alarming rate, which is I don't say that by way of judgment. When I listen to podcasts, I did them at that speed because I was like, give me the goods. But the goods come in a package, and the package is important. Or like in recording a podcast, you have the freedom to take time to answer, because the point of a podcast isn't for me to appear competent. That's not the point. The point of a podcast is like, I think about it in terms of conversion by way of conversation. The point is to kind of introduce people into a conversation, and the ultimate goal of that conversation is to know what's true, because there's a freedom that comes with knowing what's true. It's not just like, yay, let's say things which get people to click more rapidly and more frequently, because that's not it. That can't be it. Because if we concede that we're all just material girls in a material world, then it's just bad. So I think like in a classroom setting, how do you encourage your students, or how do you console your students in that regard? Like, how do you encourage them to be on the way, to take time to pass by way of imperfection, and like introduce them into a conversation which will ultimately be beatifying?
Yeah, I think part of it is just like classroom technique, right? So let's ask a question, and then let's have everybody write down what they think they would say as an answer, and then we'll talk about it. But it's very slow, right? It's especially when you're talking about theology or God in a required course, not everybody's comfortable with that. So take it slow, and then also create opportunities for students to articulate things in their language, right? So a few weeks ago we were going to read some Athanasius, and that's tough to teach, and I'm always kind of intimidated teaching Athanasius. But we had just read the Gospel of John, and we had talked about Jesus calling himself the way. And I said, what is this about? How can Jesus call himself the way? Because, I don't know. I think I would make a pretty good way to the Father. I'm nice. What does Jesus have that I don't have? Like what makes Jesus what makes Jesus able to give me access to the Father in a special way? And I had this one girl raise her hand and go, is it because God's his dad? And I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. And that's what Athanasius is going to say too. But to have that bridge, God's Jesus' dad, that's real simple language, right? If I tried to do that in a conference paper, people would be like, are you okay? But that was perfect for where she was, and I had another one once that was so beautiful, and it was I can't remember what we were reading. It might have been the Summa Contra Gentiles. But this woman said, so is Jesus kind of the scientific version of God because we can like see him? And I was like, yes. And so she's getting at this beautiful truth, right? That the Word becomes manifest in the incarnation so that, we have access to the Father through God's, through God the words, acts and deeds and words. Acta passa is what I'm thinking of. But she says it like Jesus is the scientific version of God. And you got to like kind of work with that, right? That it's imperfect. And for me as a teacher, I find those moments really beautiful. And it's hard when students don't want to, like, students are scared that that's not the right answer because it's in their own language, right? But it's the same as, when I'm home with my kids. And, my son John, who's almost 5, is running around the house going, "Oh, great heavens." And then my son George is 2, and he's running behind him going, "Oh, great lemons." And it's absolutely delightful. And I don't butt in and go, "Excuse me, George, I think you mean great heavens. You're saying lemons? It's not, it's heavens. Thank you." Because it's this beautiful process of learning a language and being able to speak, and kind of, again, that exercise of your free will and your intellect. So what I do, that's what I think about, is sort of in the classroom, how can I tackle the onslaught of technology and sort of put students at ease about the fact that they don't have to keep a pace of that, especially in a class with me, where my favorite, it's like the pioneer days in my class. We read all kinds of old stuff. We don't use computers. That's how I like it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking then about 21st century students are experiencing anxiety at higher rates, and just kind of statistically speaking, more acutely. And so the fear of failure is more pronounced, and the paralysis that issues from that is just more dread, or dreader, regardless. Comparative adjective, dread. And as a result of which, they need more in the way of encouragement or consolation to come out into this space in which they can share, or which they can vet their ideas. And then you have, kind of like technological advances whereby your experience of the internet is very perfect, or lacking for nothing proper to what, you're researching. And then even people's images are very curated, like, "Ugh, just woke up, looks so bad," after 37 minutes of makeup and a very staged picture.
I do that all the
time. Me too. Yeah, after I've spent 37 minutes trimming my beard. So I guess welcoming students into this space without being condescending, without being patronizing, but I suspect that it has to recognize and reverence this progress in the truth, or this kind of journey to the truth, while picking out truths, even if partial or limited, along the way. Maybe I don't know. I'm just not, I've just started teaching, and I'm not a really good teacher, to be honest, because I'm just in the kind of data download, produce content. People can listen to it at 2 times speed, and who cares, because you just cast it into a digital space type mindset. So I don't yet have the solicitude or the care or the concern for my students, which will ultimately generate them. But I think that's possible. Based on your experience, what are ways in which you can facilitate that? I mean, with these old texts, with these great masters, without, easy access to technology, but in the setting of a classroom, I'm looking for ways of just being better.
Ways to facilitate an encounter with old text or old ideas, and sort of help the students realize they can actually read this, even though it's hard, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's part. I mean, what I want for them is to know and to love God. And I know that there are a bunch of intermediate steps, and that these methods, or that these texts, these conversations, are the types of things which have proven themselves worthy in the past. But I don't always know how to, introduce them into those conversations, to welcome them into that space. Yeah.
I know what you mean. I mean, I don't know if the thing that I'm thinking of right now is this professor at Boston College named Fred Lawrence. I don't know if you know him. He does Lonergan. I had a class with him once, and it was a really tough class. And I came in once, 15 minutes late, terrible mood, and he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, great, you're here!" And he hands me this enormous packet, which I looked at, and it was an Advent calendar. And he had spent the first 10 minutes of class just taking the students through this Advent calendar that he really liked, and we're getting into the season of Advent, and he wanted us to know about it. And I never have forgotten that, and it's totally changed the way I treat students that come in late to class, because it made my day, and it made me feel like a part of what was going on. And one of the things that Fred used to say was, "You're loved into it." Whatever it is that your approach to the truth, or your approach to God, you're loved into it. And so I try to think, yes, the classroom is a place where understanding has to happen, where truth is sought. But also it's a place where students need to be validated that, their particular, their particular soul, like their particular intellect, the things that they're grappling with, these things are important too. So I don't know what that looks like in the classroom. For me, is a lot of asking what they think to start with, and then and trying to get their language, and then incorporating that into the discussion of the texts, the older texts. And a lot of times too, it's what we do is we just read a paragraph or a stanza of something, and I say, okay, scale of 1 to 10, what was that like for you? 1 being, I don't understand this at all. 10 being, I could write a dissertation on this. And then we say, let's identify a few things we don't know, or a few things that we have questions about. And we start with the questions, and we normalize asking the questions. And typically they're amazing questions. I mean, when we read the Genesis story and we read about the fall, right? In Genesis chapter 3, I had a girl the other day who said, hey, wait a second. The serpent talked to Eve about the fruit, but God told Adam about the fruit. What's that about? And that's perfect. That's a perfect observation, because it allows us to get into like Satan's disruption of the order of God's creation, right? And but we got to do it in her language. And this woman, like, I don't know, she's getting her BA, and for her part-time job, she cleans up ORs in a local hospital. She's not going to major in religious studies, but she has those intuitions because there's a natural desire in her for the truth. So that's, I don't know if that's helpful. That's just kind of how I proceed. That's a lot of like pedagogy, but I guess that's what I think about a lot because I teach a lot.
Okay, so I want to follow up on another aspect or another dimension of this. I'm thinking specifically about how technological innovation changes human community, or the way in which human community is itself either impoverished or enriched. So, the pandemic, a lot of people had access to FaceTime, whereas 15 years previously they wouldn't. And so they felt closer to their friends and families, whereas they might not have been able to be close to them. But then you could ask the opposite question. Were we content to isolate in the way that we did, in part because we felt we had, the type of access to community, which, truth be told, wasn't actually serving the human, so there's these debates that you can host. And I'm thinking here about technology because, I guess some scholars will observe that we as human beings in relationships do much in the way of like information offloading in the setting of a relationship. So, if I'm married to this person and she knows these things, I know that I don't need to remember them. So then when we go to a Christmas party once a year, I'm like, I'm never going to remember these people's names because I know that my wife will prompt me and everything is awesome. Jesus, you are Lord. But when we get in the habit of relying upon our phones to look stuff up, in the midst of conversation, or ChatGPT to do all of the number crunching or the processing, then we're not in those same types of relationships, or we're not in the same type of like network of dependencies. So can you think, I don't know, again, in your classroom experience or in the research that you've done about ChatGPT and beyond, like ways in which we can retain this human communal dimension of inquiry, of conversation, of kind of corporate conversion? Like what are ways in which we can be sensitive to that or to be good practitioners of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I definitely see, with this technology, it's like a huge wave that's coming. You sort of want to resist it, but you know that you can't, and that it seems so convenient for some. And even the way I've used my phone has changed in the last, 10, 15 years, looking stuff up, right? It's exactly like that. I was cracking up because when I was doing this talk, I came across this quote from the Phaedrus. And I have to credit Joshua Heschel for this because he had mentioned it in one of his TI talks. But where Plato's like, man, if people learn to write, civilization is going down the drain. And he hates the idea of people learning to write. And I think it's a little odd that this came to us through writing, and kind of want to think about that. But it's this idea that when you change the techne, if I can use that word there, when you change the thing you're doing, it changes the way you think, and it does change the way you relate to people. During the pandemic, I got to go to a lot of conferences on Zoom, a lot of academic things, and it was awesome because I'm an introvert, and so I could fidget, and I could ask questions, and I was a lot more confident, and I got to shut that all off when I wanted to and just do sort of more thoughtful work away from all the distractions of technology. It's not the same though for everybody, right? Some people were just craving that interaction, and what I love about sort of my colleagues here at the school where I teach is that we do have all these different areas of expertise, and so we learn from one another. And I have a colleague who always is coming in talking about Kant and utilitarianism, and most days it's okay to do that. But also maybe what we need to do is intentionally slow down and say, I could Google that and figure out what the answer is, but I don't know. Like, I don't know when the Council of Ferrara Florence was, but I can still kind of think about it and talk about it. And, it's created this question. And so later I can go back and look for the answer and maybe it'll stick with me a little more. But it's a challenge with my kids too, because I want to Google everything for them. My son right now is like, Mom, what's the fastest thing in the world? And I'm like, okay, what do you mean? Do you mean like a land animal, or can it be in air? And, he gives me some, well, okay, I think it's probably, one of the sonic jets, but I don't know. I could Google it, but I don't know. I don't want to, because it's almost like it makes the process of inquiry less cool. Mom, what's the hottest thing there is? Well, I think it's a white dwarf star. And I'm like second guessing myself. And I do actually have to look that up and tell him what it is, because I don't know. But I don't know. Maybe the process of formulating the questions and sitting in the uncertainty is something people do together. That's good. Like you were talking earlier about this as sort of a journey of knowing the truth. Kind of we're in statu viae, right? So we have to live into that. We can't pretend we're done, because we're not done. We're still figuring out the truth and learning to contemplate the truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, so thinking about it, what does it mean to be a wayfarer? Right. So it's to be on pilgrimage, and a pilgrimage has a destination, and the destination characterizes your experience of the whole journey, because an aimless pilgrimage is a poor pilgrimage indeed. So on the one hand, you don't want to relativize the experience and say like, the destination doesn't matter. It's all about the journey, because that's not true. And you can die of exposure in the midst of savage mountains and be lost to your loved ones. But on the other hand, the point isn't just to arrive at the destination. I don't think that people who start the Camino from their homes in Switzerland regret it when they come to discover that you get the little certificate provided that you depart at least from Saria, 100 kilometers away.
Yeah,
it's just like,
exactly.
You fool, you spent 3,200 kilometers when you could have spent 100. They're like, yeah, that's not the point. And I think that like virtue does afford us a beautiful way by which to enter into that mystery, because you don't just want to arrive. You want to heal and grow on the way, such that you become worthy of the destination, such that when you enter into the sanctuary, you're made competent to worship, because you're meant to offer your life. Like, it's not just a matter of offering your discrete knowledge of this fact or your discrete acquisition of this good. It's like, I want to give you everything, but that means, I'm a human being, and to give you everything means to give you everything in time and space over the course of however long you permit me to live. Yeah.
And that there's no particular aspect of human life that is worthless in light of this greater goal, as long as it's sort of ordered toward that goal. I don't know. I'm thinking of one of my favorite things. So I study the Catena Aurea, and there's this part where Jesus, in the Gospels, cures a blind man by spitting in the ground. And one of the Greek fathers, a guy named Theophylact, he says, well, why did he spit? And this is question like, if Jesus could have just healed the blind man by touching him, why did he spit? And I especially love this story because this is the same question my 4-year-old asked me when I read this children's book about this story. He goes, why did he spit? And at the time we were working on not spitting, so maybe that was part of it. But what Theophylact says is, because even the most superfluous moisture of Christ's body is divine. It was like, wow. You think, okay, fully God, fully human. Yeah, I get it. And then you think about the spit. You're like, wow, the word spit. And so it kind of makes everything that you do able to be taken up into that mystery, into that journey, and sort of offered to God. I can't remember why we started talking about that. Sorry, but
That's
no,
cool.
you don't want to die alone in the mountains. That's right. You want to in every part of the journey, you want to have the end in mind. Yeah.
And I mean, like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, have you done the Camino? I was wondering.
I've done part of it. Yeah, have you?
Oh, okay. Yeah. We left from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, so the
Okay.
border of Spain and France, and I did meet people who like walked out of their house and onto the path in Belgium, and it was cool.
Yeah. No, we left from Astorga, which is 170 miles to the east. So I guess like a third of the distance from what you would have traveled. But I went with zero expectations. It was kind of like I have to do this thing and that thing and the other thing, and then walk the Camino and then get back up here and then go to the, so like I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't recollected, but I was bowled over by it. In part because the experience is encompassing. It's like when you're on the Camino, you're just on the Camino. You're not keeping up with your emails. You're not remaining in touch. You're not able to plug away at this little side project. You're just, it's like you're just on the Camino. And there was something about that for me that was so, healing and growing, because I think that one of the effects of technology in my life is that it permits me to be more compartmentalized and in fact more divided. So there was something about like receiving my humanity back whole over the course of 12 days as my feet gradually disintegrated in kind of like pulpy, blisterous messes. That was great. It was just focused, and for lack of a better word, abandoned. Like, here we are. This is what we're doing. And as a result of which, I felt like I was able to like meet people, encounter people more profoundly. Some of whom I'm still in contact with. It's just like random people in random places.
Totally. Yeah. No, that was my experience too. And I think I was coming out of undergrad and a graduate program. And the graduate program was a service program, so I was teaching and then also getting an MED. And all of a sudden, I was just on the Camino. And I didn't have to do anything else. And I like how you put that, just the restoration of your humanity, even as your feet disintegrate. So what do I want to say? Hang on, let me think. Sorry. I lost my train of thought, but it was important. Hang on.
You don't have to apologize.
Okay. Well, I was used to having come out of these, academic programs and then doing teaching and being kind of like a young single high school teacher who like chaperoned all the dances and coached all the cross country team, stuff. And I was used to just totally punishing my body. Like, my body doesn't matter. I'm just gonna like fill it with caffeine, get out there, produce a lot of content for the students, for my programs. And I wasn't necessarily totally related to technology, but technology definitely facilitated that, right? All the emails, all the online learning platforms. And then when I was out on the Camino, I couldn't do any of that stuff. And I had to do things like wash my shirt, and stretch and think about what I wanted to eat. Because if I ate badly, I would really feel it the next day. And it was just this total return to all of these very practical things. But I very much experienced sort of the love of God in that because of how much it was sort of a validation of being created with a mind and a body, which you kind of forget. And I think that's maybe the source of the anxiety for some students we're talking about earlier, right? It's like we're not very good at living as a embodied. I don't know how to say it. We're not very good at living as a person with a mind and a body. It's like we're kind of, I don't know.
As an
Yeah,
embodied
that's my
soul or as an ensouled body.
yeah, hylomorphism.
Boom. Yeah, the last day of walking, I was on the verge of tears for the entirety of it. And which like sometimes happen. I have grandparents and great grandparents who were, like Italian, so I feel things and I gesticulate wildly. Um, but it like kind of snuck up on me where I didn't realize that the experience had been working some change or some effect in my life until I was conscious that it was present and didn't know how to name it. I was like, whoa, which is great. Yeah, which is super beautiful. So yeah, no, I am grateful
Well,
for it.
I think that's a perfect example of a time when somebody asks you to write a paper on that, right, or give a talk on that experience, and you're like, how do I say this? Maybe ChatGPT can articulate this experience for me, right? ChatGPT, imagine you're a pilgrim with Italian ancestors walking into the square of Santiago de Compostela. What would you say? And like, no, that totally misses the point, right? I'm looking at the I'm looking at the commentary on John here, right? And Aquinas is like, human speech is messy, and we have to say things. We have to proceed through many kinds of words to get at what we're the concept that we're forming, or what the thing we're thinking are interior words. But that's the whole point. I mean, that's the dignity of the human person, is to have an experience and say, I don't really know exactly how to describe this, but I'm going to try,
Yeah,
right?
it's worth trying to, and I
Yeah.
love trying to. Yeah, yeah. I was recently reading Eugene Boylan, who was a 20th century Cistercian, I mean Trappist. Those are both true. And he wrote a handful of commentaries on the spiritual life. And in one, he makes the observation, we talk about mental prayer, we talk about meditation, good, good, good. But recognize the fact that there are three dimensions to it and they shouldn't be collapsed. One is spiritual reading, one is reflection, and then one is what one might call mental prayer, or like a kind of contemplative disposition whereby one formulates these affections and is in kind of like living, grappling, almost tension with God. And he says a lot of people just tend to drop out the reflection piece, and I think maybe this is a good note on which to conclude. um, yeah, it's like worth thinking about things, even if you're not in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, even if you can't call it mental prayer, even if it doesn't seem to serve another purpose in your life. Like I was reading Boylan, and I was actually on retreat in June, and so I just took time to write some bad poetry because it's bad poetry. I don't think it needs a further justification. Then it's bad. I mean, it's bad poetry, um, because like you need that. Like your mind needs to be able to expand to that possibility at the very least, and that reality, perhaps more simply stated. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe your thoughts on thought, speech, expression. Any concluding thoughts that you want to say apropos of our human culture and our human vocation?
Sure. Well, I mean, as I was preparing the talk for Brown, one of the things I came across was an icon of Christ reading from Isaiah in the temple. And that sort of brought home the whole point I wanted to make about sort of the human endeavor to search for and talk about the truth in the life of faith. Because we have as our model and our exemplar, a God who, though being perfect word, right, from eternity, became flesh, walked into a place of worship, opened up a book that he inspired as word, and read the words that another dude wrote based on his inspiration of him. I mean, what kind of God does that, right? Like, oh, I wouldn't have exactly said it that way. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, but this is the humility of God. And so this kind of, for me, this is a very important message that sort of our discussion, the human desire to sort of pursue the truth and talk about the truth and share the truth with others in community, as you've been talking about, is all an opportunity to participate in the mystery of the incarnation. It's kind of like, St. Paul calls it a foolishness of preaching or foolishness of speech, where perhaps it would have been more efficient to go about it another way. It would have been quicker to obtain the truth through another way. But the way we have before us is is the Word made flesh, who is way and who's inviting us into the mystery of sort of following him in how it is that he chose to save us, which is through a kind of foolishness of speech. That's what I'd say is the kind of the big takeaway for me. And the thing that I try to remember as I write terrible, terrible things, and then as I, teach as well, and try to encourage students to use their own words and think about things, be confident about speaking about things that they may be unfamiliar with. So, yeah.
Amen. Yeah, it's an encouragement and a consolation for me. I think sometimes we hold ourselves to an A+ standard in all dimensions of human life. When truth be told, I think like most of us kind of deliver in a B+ kind of maybe A- type way for the most part. And there are going to be days in which we deliver a B or a B- or a C+ or something catastrophic. I mean, that happens too. And there are going to be rare moments when we deliver the A+ content. And I think it's better this way because it reminds us of the gratuity of the whole dispensation. Like, what do you have that you have not received? If therefore you have received it, why do you boast as if it were your own? So there's the sense in which, for their pagans are visited by the muse and we by the word incarnate. And so, to cultivate a certain disposition of welcome, almost hospitality sounds silly and blah, blah, blah. But a contemplative disposition vis-a-vis the word such that we can hear his speech and ponder it like Our Lady. It's not a bad way to live life.
I was thinking about earlier. She pondered she kept these things in her heart and she pondered them. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's see. Resources that you might recommend to the individual interested in these types of things. The Catena Aurea of St. Thomas Aquinas for all things patristic and sifted by St. Thomas himself, but any other recommendations that you might make pursuant to the conversation?
Yeah, in terms of ChatGPT and thinking about the way technology works versus the way the human brain works, I think there's a few TI talks that are really good on this that I'd recommend. One is Jonathan Bottacci's talk, Why Would a Biologist Believe in the Soul? And then another is Joshua Hochschild has a talk, I think it's called What is My Phone Doing to Me? But in that talk, he has a lot of great stuff about sort of technology, and he goes into AI as well. And Yulia Klima, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has also given a relevant talk with TI. But the question, I think, sometimes when we talk about AI and human production and human speech, the question comes down to, do we have souls or not, and are we completely determined by material processes or not? And those TI talks I just mentioned are really good for that. And then, I just always plug reading Aquinas himself, right? The Johannine Prologue is really meaty. If you were a student at the University of Paris, it would have taken you 11 days to get through it. But just to read that and kind of see what Aquinas is doing with this idea of word, and I love the Catena Aurea. Everyone should read the Catena Aurea. It's beautiful. It's good for meditation. It's good for like trying to get through the Sunday gospel reading, what's happening. It's good for study. So.
Boom. And one of the versions that we have translated in English was translated by John Henry Newman. So
that's right.
You get a saint through a saint, which is not a bad way to live.
That's right, 1841. Yeah, and then you've got Martin Morard has this amazing site, if people know Latin, where he's looking up all the sources for these texts. We can see where they came from. So as Thomas assembles these different fathers and their commentary, Martin Morard is going like, oh yeah, that's from Gregory of Nyssa's homily from Transfiguration of our Lord, etc., etc.
Cool. Dig. All right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, for giving your time. And maybe we can follow up on the conversation once our entire civilization has been overtaken by robots. Just kidding.
Sounds good. No, that'd be good. If they let us do it, we can do it.
All right. So, presuming the permission of said robots, we'll look forward to chatting with you again. Turning to you, the listener, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Thomistic Institute podcast, Off-Campus Conversations. And yeah, look forward to chatting with you at intervals. It seems like 2 weeks is the interval. So at 2-week intervals. So know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on the Thomistic Institute podcast.